You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
Hey folks, welcome to the MSP Zone. Got a lot to talk about today. A full episode planned. We're going to be talking about the Australian ransomware ban. Even if you're not living in Australia, you should pay attention to this one because it's going to have huge global implications for MSPs all over the world. We're going to be talking about some advice that I gave to a younger MSP that has some questions about how to grow and how to achieve growth. Be very, very critical segment. And then finally, some passing thoughts on Mike Collin, who we lost some weeks ago. And I just wanted to share some of my thoughts about Mike, and we'll save that for the end. So first, Australian ransomware ban, inevitable. This was the story headline that actually came out late last year. And I know you're saying, Charles, why do we care? I'm not Australian. I may not even be an MSP. Why should I listen to this? You should pay attention. If you're an MSP, you should pay attention. If you care about managed service providers, you should pay attention. And if you live in Australia, you should pay attention. If you live anywhere else other than Australia, you should also pay attention because this is coming to a city, town, country near you. Ransomware ban is, quote, inevitable, but won't become reality for at least 2 years. So this is a story from cyberdaily.au. I don't know who these folks are. It's just a website that came in during my feed, and I read it. And okay, so they're covering the Australian government, and this is one of the stories that they decided to track late in 2023. The subtitle is the Australian government, has revealed that a ban on ransomware payments will happen, but it won't happen for at least 2 years as more groundwork needs to be laid. Okay. Why should you care? You're asking yourself. This is not just unique to Australia. This is happening everywhere. It's happening in the United States. It's happening in Canada. It's happening in the EU. It's happening in the UK. All these governments are talking to each other, and they're all looking at each other and trying to figure out, who's leading and who's moving in which direction from a policy standpoint. And it is so clear. And I know we've talked about it a lot on this program. We've written a lot about it. We've put out a lot of stuff on social media about ransomware and how to deal with it as an MSP. But I am telling you folks, the days of ransomware payments being the first option that organizations turn to deal with retrieval of their data after a cyber attack are quickly coming to an end. And I am not saying that ransomware payments are going to go away. I've been on the record saying that it's not going to ever just completely vanish. But it will lessen. The pressure on organizations that make ransomware payments will increase, meaning the likelihood of audit, sanction, civil, maybe criminal penalties, or a variation of all of those things, and some new things that we haven't even thought of yet, are likely to increase over time, starting now. All right, I'm not talking like decades, I'm talking about now, to the point where ransomware payments just become too problematic for organizations to make, which is no doubt the intent here. So I'll read you a quote from the article. I'll post this article in case you guys want to read it yourself, but here's a quote from it, and someone speaking from the Australian Minister of Home Affairs and Cybersecurity, someone named Claire O'Neill. Quote, the payment of ransoms at the moment is effectively businesses around the world, funneling millions and millions and hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars into criminal gangs who reinvest that money back in their capability, said Minister O'Neill. So every time a ransom is paid, we are feeding the cybercrime problem. Now, we are in a situation in our country where it is clearly not the right time at this moment to ban ransoms, and that's because we haven't done the hard work. Okay? What hard work are they talking about? Cyber hygiene. Cyber hygiene, folks. It's the stuff that MSPs do day in and day out. It's the work and the expertise that MSPs all over the world, including in Australia, do, but their customers may not take advantage of that. That's how I would interpret the hard work or the groundwork that needs to be laid from an Australian policy standpoint, and true here. We're going through the same exact kind of motions here in the United States government. We're talking about the defense industrial base. We'll have that on another episode. We've got some new emerging um, reports about how the private sector is going to be, I think, leveraged even more greatly than we realized before in securing the defense industrial base for the U.S. government. But just like it's happening in Australia, we're having it here with CMMC. We're having it here with state governments and the state government efforts to shore up all of their critical infrastructure, and state and local municipal governments who are coming increasingly under cyber attack more and more regularly. And shall I mention the increase in these cyber attacks is also coinciding with a deepening reluctance by insurance companies to really embrace this and drive change. Although they're doing some pretty good work, it's not fast, it's not enough, and it's not really being done from a leadership perspective because it's not really what insurance companies do or know. That's a whole separate issue. But back to the issue at hand, ransomware payments and their likelihood of being banned. Plan for it now. How do you plan for it? Well, I got a few notes. Number one, you should start to update your managed service provider organization company policies today. And you would, in my opinion, be really well served if you were to update your policies to anticipate a time where ransomware isn't an option, either for your MSP organization or for your customers. Those are kind of two really separate but really important and similar concepts. But I would start now by saying we have a policy, and the policy is not to lean on ransomware payments as an option. So where does that leave you? Well, after you've updated your own internal policies, you should change your tone and you should change the conversation with your customers and communicate what's happening and say to them, hey, let's start working now for this eventuality of the day when it comes, and it will come in Australia or anywhere else in the developed world, where you're not going to be able to make that ransomware payment. Or if you do make it, it's going to come with so much hassle and red tape that it's not going to be worth your time to do it. Well, you're probably going to get a response like, well, MSP, what else can we do? And I hope you are prepared for that. I know a lot of MSPs are, but I know probably a good amount that aren't. You should go over all the options, all the service delivery, security, business, risk items that you can do as their MSP with the customer, because a lot of this stuff is going to be you. There's a lot of stuff that you, the MSP, can do. New services, backing up data, MFA, all the stuff, all the usual stuff. There's stuff that you can't do, and there's stuff that you can help the customer to do themselves. And you should be having conversations about all three of those things. You should be talking to the customers now and preparing for this. Number three, you should be revising your service catalog, your pricing, and your contracts to reflect what you will and will not do. And I know some of you probably already have mention of ransomware payments, and what you will do and what you won't do. But a lot of you probably haven't gotten that far, and your contracts don't talk about that. And your baseline managed services service catalog probably doesn't articulate that, right? Meaning that you could take on a managed services customer tomorrow and they might be well below a baseline level of service that would protect them against something that would eventually lead to a ransomware attack, a successful one. You need to revise your service catalog. Your service catalog then needs to reflect accurate, updated pricing, and all of that needs to be articulated into an agreement of some sort. Certainly, your master service agreement and your service attachment, service catalog, service agreement, whatever you call it. It's a service attachment in my world, but you can call it whatever you want. Finally, fourth, set a switchover date and stick to it. This is going to get to my next point, and the advice I gave to a less mature MSP who wanted to grow and mature in their practice. Setting a switchover date is really critical. Folks, if you've ever wanted a moment in history where there is so much ammunition, so much legitimate reason for an organization to stop handling their IT assets and resources as a reactive concept or a reactive object, now is the time. Today, now is the time to act. You have more argument, more wind at your back, propelling you towards an outcome where you can convince an organization who has been reactive and break fix for a long period of time, even, and tell them, look, we're going to make 2024 the year where we're going to take you off of break fix and turn you into a managed services customer. And you'll thank us for it. And you'll never have to worry about, do I make a ransomware payment? Don't I? Because you will have other options to protect yourself. Okay. And I'm not saying, folks, that doing this stuff is going to prevent attacks, successful attacks on your customers. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is if you know that a critical tool in ransomware data retrieval is going to be eventually ruled out of bounds and is even now being discouraged, why aren't you talking about this with your customers and helping them prepare and setting that date and saying, this is the date, we're switching over, no looking back, onward and upward. That's what I would be looking at. That's what I'd be talking about. If you're in Australia, folks, all this applies to you. And I would be really, really aggressive in your time frame because they're basically telling you, hey, it's going to probably come in a couple of years. I don't think we've had that level of real clear guidance from the US. We've had, kind of ambiguous, not articulate, I should say, and ambiguous isn't the right word, but not articulate um, murmurs, right, from the FBI saying, "Hey, we don't think you should be making ransomware payments." We've had the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, part of the Treasury Department here, saying we might come after you for sanctions. All those things we've talked about. Everybody's talking about this. The executive, the Biden administration has been very clear about going out to other governments that we work with and saying to them, let's all sign a pledge saying that we're going to be moving in this general direction towards preventing, if not banning, eventually ransomware payments. Folks, the writing's on the wall. Can't be any more clear than that. They're all moving in the general direction. Some governments are going to get there first, sooner rather than later, but eventually this is all going to pick up steam, and you're going to see everyone marching steadily in the same direction and accomplishing, ultimately, with some minor variation, the same goal. Be prepared, be forewarned, talk to your customers, execute a plan, get it done, preferably in 2024. Okay, next topic. We had a new member join, I think, a couple weeks ago. This was like maybe a one, two, or about a 3-person shop, so kind of a smaller MSP. And there's nothing wrong with it, right? There's a lot of you who've started as 1-person shops, 3-person, 5-person shops. I get you guys are the lifeblood of small business. You're the lifeblood of the managed services profession, in my opinion. And enough can't be said about the good work that you guys do. But this one company called us up and said, hey, we just joined the MSP Alliance and we wanted to get some just advice on what should we be doing? How do we grow? And I'll synthesize kind of the advice because I thought it was good advice at the time. The person seemed to really appreciate it. And I thought some of you might be in a very similar situation, although maybe you're at a different size. Doesn't matter. This advice applies to any growing, aspiring MSP. And this, I should preface this by saying this company had, it wasn't a startup. This company had existing customers, but this customer had a good mixture of managed services and a probably more than they wanted mixture of break fix customers. And so he was kind of asking a question of, look, how do I take, I don't say an equal portion of break fix and managed services, and how do I get more to the managed services, and what do I do with my existing break fix customers? But that's basically what he was saying. How do I execute that strategy? First, I said, you have to acknowledge as the owner of this MSP business that every break fix company you have right now, and certainly any new break fix company that you sign on, hopefully you don't, I said, but every break fix customer you have inhibits growth and expansion and scalability of your managed services aspirations. And I thought that, I don't know if it caught him off guard, but I think he hadn't ever looked at it that way. And I said, it, I talk to a lot of MSPs, as you know. I when I say stuff like this, I think they don't look at their break fix companies as doing any harm. I think they look at them as, I wish they were over on the managed services side, on the proactive side, but I don't think they look at those break fix companies as being a negative. And that's what I tried to tell this MSP business owner. I said, look, if you look at them as harmless, that's a mistake. They're not harmless. They do take up time. They do take up highly manual time and energy and resources in your company, and especially for a very small company, that's everything. That's everything. How are you going to grow rapidly a managed services side of the business while you're tending to what I called a pretty significant heavy weight latched to your ankle? How are you ever going to have that momentum to grow as a company while you have these break fix companies? So I said, start by looking at those break fix companies for what they are. They're preventing your growth, they're preventing your scalability, and they're chewing up valuable resources that you need elsewhere. Number one. Number two, similar to what we were talking about with the Australian ransomware ban, have a plan to migrate those break fix companies over into your managed services side. Talk about ransomware if you must. Talk about cybersecurity. Talk about compliance. Talk about whatever you think will resonate with that customer, that break fix customer. There is so much material you can draw from to help you have a conversation that is meaningful with a break fix company to tell them, this is why we're going to be moving you into a new direction and make you safer and make you better, at least from an IT management standpoint. You got to have a plan. You have to understand what you're going to say, and then you actually have to have the conversation. And third, I said to this entrepreneur, this business, small MSP business owner, you need to execute your plan and you need to have a timeline, because if you leave this as an open-ended, we'll get to it, whenever you feel like it, and you give them a little bit of an inch to escape, they will. They will use that, and they will take advantage of it, and they will say, that's the easier path. It's not really easier. In their mind, it's easier. And so they're going to take the out instead of making the switch and moving into a managed services, which I don't have to go through all the benefits, right? The improved budgetability, the streamline of your IT management, financial budgeting capabilities, the increase in the ROI in terms of what you spend dollar for dollar, and the return on investment you get from a managed services side compared to a reactive break fix relationship, which, even if it did anything of value on the IT management side, it does nothing on a compliance, cybersecurity, or risk front. In fact, it does more harm than good. Have a strategy and execute it. Put a finite date where that transition is going to take place, or else. Now, that's the or else is really challenging. And I told this business owner, and I said, look, I understand I'm giving you advice, but you're the one that has to execute it. And he appreciated it. But I said, I think you need to have a conversation with your break fix customers that includes a deadline of when this is going to take place. And you have to make a decision as a business owner what you're going to do. And having started out the conversation by saying there's no good reason to have a break fix customer on your books because they're just dragging you down, I think he understood at the end that having a switchover date is really going to put a fine point on this whole exercise of trying to get break fix customers to appreciate their own responsibility to their staff, to their customers, for their own data management, for their own IT management responsibilities, and to give some a tangible idea of when this is going to happen, and kind of just taking the decision out of their hand, right? Some people will just put off making what they perceive as big decisions. And sometimes it takes someone who knows what the right thing is to do. It's hard for someone, whether it's a patient or a client or a customer, to come to grips with that. Sometimes you just need someone to say, look, we're going to do this. I'm going to make it easy for you. We're going to do it at the end of the year. We're going to do it at the mid-year. We're going to do it at the end of Q1 2024. Whatever it is. Everyone's going to be a little bit different, but if you have a strategy and you outline it for them and you say, this is what we're going to do, more often than not, people are going to go along with it. If they trust you, if they believe you're sincere, and if they believe that what you're doing is actually going to be better for them. Have a plan with a due date, execute on that plan. That's what I told this MSP business owner. And that's what I'm telling all of you MSP business owners and operators who have even one break fix customer. Make this year, 2024, the year when you have a strategy and you execute that strategy to get them over to proactive managed services. Get it done. Okay. A few weeks ago, I was on LinkedIn and I saw some stuff about Mike Cullen passing away, and it's kind of a surreal thing, because some of you who don't know Mike Cullen don't know what he did. I'll explain. And by the way, I knew Mike for 20 plus years. There are many people who had a much deeper personal relationship with him, especially the people who worked very closely with him at Enable. But he he was a guy that did a lot for this industry, and that's what I want to take a little bit of time to recognize the effort and the impact he had. Um, and certainly the impact he had on me and the MSP lines, because a lot of the things that we were doing very early on, in the profession in the very very early 2000s, these are the same things that Mike at Enable was dealing with and trying to overcome. Um, if you are not in the Enable ecosystem, you never really bought any Enable products. You say, well, why should I care about this? Well, Mike was one of the very early. He headed up the sales team for this. I'm talking pre SolarWinds MSP, pre when they went back to Enable. This is before when the original Enable started in 2000 2001. Um, and he headed up sales, global sales. And you may be saying, well, okay, so what? He sold RMM. Um, you know, so what? It's not just so what. It's not that his accomplishment is not that he sold RMM for Enable. His accomplishment, his impact, his achievement in the managed services profession is that at a time when managed services was very different, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, managed services was going through a huge popularity upswing for a time in the late 1990s, particularly at the enterprise level. Hyped by the dot-com era and all the funding that went along with that. That was the initial, the very first big surge in managed services that we saw. And then, a handful of things happened. You had Y2K. Those of you who weren't around then, look it up. Y2K, you had 9/11, and you had the dot-com kind of collapse and the economic collapse that went along with that. All happened in roughly the same, at the same time, within a year or two of each other. All three of those things all happened. And during that time when Enable had just, started, they were really the dominant RMM company for MSPs. And what they were doing, and for those of you who don't know the history, and it's really important that you do know the history. Enable was the RMM company of record, and ConnectWise had just started. Their managed services division had been around prior to that, but the ConnectWise, the PSA had just started. They weren't anything else other than a PSA. And then you had Kaseya, which was really not an RMM at the time, but they were more desktop management. And so those three vendors were really the first breakouts of companies that were pushing MSP tools to companies. But here's the challenge. They weren't selling, none of those three companies, but including Enable, they weren't selling to MSPs. Who were they selling to? They were selling to break fix companies. They were selling to value added resellers. They were selling to system integrators. They were selling to IT consulting firms. They were selling to data hosting companies, data centers. There weren't a lot of MSPs. What makes the achievement of Mike Cullen at that time and after, but especially at that time, is that he laid the groundwork in his role in selling Enable RMM early on in the early 2000s. He was selling that technology to companies to convince them to become managed IT service providers when very few existed. He was selling a business model. He was selling a profession. He was selling, don't be a break fix company anymore. That's dead. It's gone, or it's going to go away. Don't be a VAR. Don't be an integrator. Don't be a consultant. Managed services is the wave of the future. And if you believe that, you're going to need technology that is different than the type of enterprise technology that existed back then, which none of it was suited for. The average MSP couldn't use it, couldn't afford it, couldn't understand it, couldn't make it work. It wasn't multi-tenant. The stuff was outdated. And along comes this new breed of technology companies led by Enable and spearheaded by Mike Cullen, by him traveling the world, going out there, trying to convince companies to become MSPs. Now, part of this hits home for me because we came up in the same era. And so we were, both of us, traveling the globe trying to convince the same types of companies to become MSPs. He was trying to sell RMM. I was trying to sell membership with MSP Alliance. But that's what he did. And he was a trailblazer for it, because of that achievement. And if there's an MSP history book, he deserves a good chunk of it dedicated to the efforts that he did. And I'm not short selling or ignoring all the other companies that came after that, or even the salespeople and the other executives within Enable that did a lot to contribute. I'm not ignoring that. I'm just saying that what Mike did is special because of the time during which he was doing it. And it made it really difficult. But I think, at least my perception was, he made it look surprisingly easy, because we would talk to new members and they would tell us, hey, we're an MSP. We just became an MSP last year. And we'd ask them, oh, yeah, who are you using? Oh, we use Enable. I said, oh, you must, Mike Cullen must have sold it to you. Yeah, we know Mike. That was like so common back then. So we were always, kind of crossing paths, globally speaking, in terms of our efforts to grow and spread the word about managed services. And it's a big loss to the community. Not just because, he was he was kind of a, if you never met him, he was a really positive guy. He was very full of energy, and my perception of him was he could talk a VAR into becoming an MSP, like over drinks, which is his job. And yeah, it's a big loss for the community, but it's important for the rest of us, especially those who may not be in the Enable community, may not know who he was, or the role, the legacy that he left behind. It's important for you to know that. It matters. We need to remember people who blazed a trail and helped us accomplish where we are today. And I don't think we would be anywhere close to where we are today without people like Mike Cullen. So, rest in peace, brother.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.